On January 1st, 1900, the state of Florida opened a reform school on 1,400 acres of isolated panhandle land outside the small town of Marianna. They called it a school. They called it rehabilitation. They called it a second chance for troubled boys. They lied. For over a century, children as young as 5 years old were committed to this institution. Some had stolen something. Some had skipped school. Some had simply disobeyed their parents. Some were orphans with nowhere else to go. The charge on their paperwork often read one word: incorrigible. That single word was enough to strip a child from his mother and deliver him to Marianna, Florida, where the state would do with him whatever it pleased. The boys who arrived had their heads shaved, were fitted in gray uniforms, and were marched into a world that operated entirely outside the reach of the law, outside the reach of their families, and outside the reach of anything resembling human decency. Black boys bore the worst of it. Their side of the campus was older, more deteriorated, and more dangerous. While white boys received vocational training, black boys were sent to the fields, planting, harvesting, hauling, for the financial benefit of the state. One survivor said plainly, the black side was the slave side. Some of the earliest abuse reports, dating back to 1903, described children being chained to walls in leg irons. The beatings, the sexual abuse, and the mysterious disappearances continued decade after decade regardless of which administration was in power, regardless of which governor made promises. The institution endured because the state allowed it to endure. At the edge of the campus stood a small white building. No windows. A metal bed frame bolted to the floor. A heavy leather strap, 2 feet long, fixed to a wooden handle, hanging from a nail on the wall, and a box fan mounted near the ceiling. Boys called it the White House. Staff would get boys out of bed at 2 in the morning, drag them to the White House, throw them onto the bed, tie their feet, and beat them with that strap until they were done. The fan ran the entire time, not for ventilation, to drown out the screaming. One survivor described receiving over 100 lashes from the small of his back to behind his knees. He passed out. What woke him, he said, was choking on his own blood. Johnny Gaddy, sent to Dozier at age 11, recalled being beaten until bloody from the waist down. He once found a boy's severed hand in garbage he was hauling for burial and was warned to say nothing, or he would meet the same fate. Families wrote letters that were never answered. Mothers drove to Marianna and were turned away at the gate. Boys disappeared and death notices arrived with no cause, no body, no explanation. Between 2012 and 2016, forensic anthropologists from the University of South Florida uncovered human remains in 55 unmarked graves, some with gunshot wounds, some with signs of blunt force trauma. The state had said 31 boys were buried there. The truth, as it always does at Dozier, turned out to be far worse. Nearly 100 children died at this school between 1900 and 1973. Not one staff member was ever charged with a crime. The school remained open until 2011, 111 years. In 2024, Florida finally established a compensation program. The state expected around 500 survivors to apply. More than 1,000 did. The White House still stands. The fan is still mounted in the wall. The graves are still out there in the Florida pines, most of them still unnamed. Some of those boys were never going home. It just took Florida over a century to admit it.